My name is Linda Konze. I'm the head of the photography collection at the Kunstpalast, and since last year this collection holds a wonderful work by Barbara Kasten, which I and everyone at Kunstpalast is very excited about. I want to briefly introduce our two guests, and as a photography curator, I have to start with the fact that Barbara Kasten's background is originally that of a painter. She studied painting in the 50s at the University of Arizona, and after graduating came to Germany and immersed herself in the teachings of the Bauhaus, and then started to incorporate photography and installation in her artistic practice, and those remain defining for her work up to today. Her work is held by several international museum collections, from the MoMA to the Centre Pompidou, the Tate Modern, to name only a few. And very recently, a book was published titled Barbara Kasten, Architecture and Film, and Barbara will sign this book after the conversation. Julia Höner is a cultural scientist, a curator, a lecturer, and an author, and until recently she was the director of the Kai-10 Athena Foundation here in Düsseldorf, so I'm sure many of you will be familiar with her as well, until she was appointed director of the Kunstmuseum Gelsenkirchen at the end of last year. So I'm very much looking forward to your conversation. Thank you so much for coming, especially to you, Barbara, and yeah, I wish us all a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Hello, does it work? Yeah, hello. Thank you for the introduction, Linda Konze, and warm welcome to everybody. I must say that I'm super honored to be here in this beautiful place of art and to do this artist talk with Barbara Kasten. And well, dear Barbara, you can't measure the amount of admiration I have for you and your work. Ever since we met in 2016, your artistic practice has been a source of inspiration for my curatorial work. And especially recently, it formed a background of important ideas when I started a new chapter of work in the Kunstmuseum Gelsenkirchen. I would also like to thank Iris Kadel and Moritz Wilborn, who made Barbara and I met in the first place in 2016, and also invited me to do this talk tonight. Thank you to both of you, and thank you also to the gallery staff and technicians of this house who done a great job to make this even happening, and often or rarely looked at so much. Barbara and we decided on a more casual talk, which goes beyond the Q&A, and to have a conversation about things, topics that are of interest to both of us. And actually, we thought about talking like roughly 40-45 minutes, and afterwards I would like to hand over the mic to you, as you might have dozens of questions to the artist as well. I was, right now at that point, I was to do a little intro with biographical notes, sources of inspirations, and important encounters that formed Barbara's career in her early stage. But Linda, you have already done a great job in doing that, so I won't repeat too much. But I think what we will start with is actually also the point where where we got to know each other and where we started to working with each other, which were the studio constructs, which you have shown in this exhibition I curated for Kai-10, Less is a Bore, which was an exhibition about postmodern aesthetics and their reverberations in the arts, in architecture, in popular culture and designs, and kind of was an exhibition that tried to blur the boundary between all of these aesthetic regimes. And you contributed with studio contracts, amongst also a very new video work. And what is interesting is also that these were not your first photographs, but before you did in the late 1970s, you did the cyanotypes,
right.
like photograms.
Right.
And maybe we switch to those, and we start with those. And
right.
so we have...
Yeah, those were the very first photographic things that I did, and they're photograms inspired by Moholy, because I was very aware of the Bauhaus and the practice due to the teacher you mentioned, Trude Germain-Pré, who taught at the school that I was getting my graduate degree. But the photogram has stayed with me all these years, and I have made photograms, a series of photograms, maybe every 5 or 10 years I do a body of work with photograms. During COVID, what else could I do but photograms, right? So it was, it's an ongoing process. The next slide, I think, shows, this one was done in the 90s, and it's actually doesn't have a subject. What you see is the emulsion that has been, it's liquid emulsion that's poured onto a piece of paper, and I put so much on it that I could swirl it and make it kind of puddle in different ways, and then I'd have to keep looking at it to make sure it dried in the same conformation, and so the imagery is really the liquid of the cyanotype. There's no, normally you would put an object, and then that would be what's recorded, but not in this case.
So very much in line with direct and straight photography of what the Bauhaus masters did.
Well, yeah, they experimented so much, and that's what I really was drawn to. The fact that, you know, you could, at the Bauhaus, they did printmaking, they book publishing, dance, textiles, painting, everything, and to me, that's the basis of my practice.
Mm-hmm. And also, one should probably mention that you had also a little side step, so to say, in a textile practice, you know, when you went with a Fulbright scholarship to Poland to study with, what's her name?
Magdalena Abakanowicz.
Exactly, and you did woven sculptures at that time, yeah? That you kind of... Or afterwards, when you came back to the US, you did these woven sculptures.
Oh,
so
right.
there is this just a broad universe of different media that you applied. And I think this is also kind of interesting in terms of your approach towards photography, which is not, I mean, also in line with the Bauhaus aesthetics, not a kind of, you know, a tool to represent, to depict the real, but to kind of use it more creative, so to say.
Well, and also I didn't know anything about photography. I knew what a camera was, but I didn't like the dark room. So, you know, this photogram and the outside with the sunlight was a perfect blend for me instead of, you know, sitting and laboring in a dark room. So that, and then the instant Polaroid material.
Yeah, we come probably to that when we talk about the studio constructs as well. I would like to switch to another construct and then come back again.
Sure.
Like, this is not a construct but a triptych, and there are several other works that are similar to that, the metaphases, etc., which are not in right now in this presentation, but which I think we were happy to show this work also in the Kai-10 show, which is, I think, now in the collection of the Kunstpalast, and also in many other collections, actually. I was just, with those works, I was just amazed by the sheer amount of visual information, you know, the kind of objects stacked on top of each other, you know, different layers in the space, mirrors reflecting, kind of everything lit dramatically in colored light, etc., which I found quite intriguing. And how came this drama into your work?
You know, nothing is attached in my work, even in the latest sculptures. I don't make objects that stay as they look. And I move things around so that you can, it's not that you can move them around, but I move them around and I get a different perspective. And with the sculptures, you can walk around and see it, but with the photographs, I compose it just for the camera. So it's really a very personal exchange between making a sculptural installation and being in that set, and then coming out of it and looking behind a large format camera. And so both things are interchangeable for me. But when I add mirrors, it's very disorienting. You know, you see parts from my perspective behind the camera. It looks different than my perspective in the space. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of all a dance, it's all a movement. Mm-hmm. And then at one point in time, you know, I make the photograph. And then I reuse all those elements again.
And I feel that it's like a still life in the truest sense of the word, because it's just capturing this one moment with all these lights that are similar probably also to how you would lit a situation in the film industry.
Well, they
are.
And
then it vanishes, because we should also say that I don't know if it holds true to this particular work, but you worked very often with objects from let's say from a building kit, from an architect's building kit, so to say, model building, which are plain white objects, and it's only the light that you know creates the image for the moment, right?
Well, I find some materials, but in this case, early in the 80s when this was made, I actually created these pyramids out of like white plaster, because I knew that I wanted to color the different sides. So on one side I have an orange light and then I have a blue light, and that emphasizes the shape. And I can move them around to become a third color. So it's sort of painting on top of three-dimensional forms.
Nice. And here comes your painting background properly.
There it comes,
steps in again. And I have to I was also thinking, because at that time, 1916, I was thinking a lot about Memphis design, and Ettore Sottsass once said, Ettore Sottsass, the godfather of Memphis, he once said, we are not interested in the substance and in the functions of objects, but in their visual appearance. And even if you told me, which I was a bit sad about, that you never met Sottsass or his companions, his disciples, or you never met, but you were kind of aware of what they were doing, I suppose.
Well, of course, it was the 80s, and I was in New York, and you know, postmodernism was at the height of its own core, and so.
And now I think we can go back also, because I think it's super interesting to talk about the Polaroid technique, because it's very special also what you did in terms of size.
Well, size, but also Polaroid itself was an instant color film, which when I began to use it was color film wasn't really very available or even acceptable at that time. Color, it was all black and white in photography. So I was doing two things. One is I was staying out of the dark room because I could make them instantly and see the results and then change them if I liked to, like one would do as a painting. And then it also enabled me to move up in size because they had this giant camera. It was an experimental camera by Polaroid, and they offered it to artists to use in exchange for a print from whatever the artist would do with it. And they built up a massive collection, which is actually still touring the world. I think I'm in a show in Japan now because one of these works, even though the Polaroid Corporation is bankrupt. But there's also a quality to Polaroid that has a surface that's almost tactile, whereas in most photographs it's not. So all of that enhances the color that you can achieve, and the scale could be larger, And this is the inside of the camera. They built it out of spare parts, is what they did. They had there was no designer for this. It was kind of like, oh, hey, we have a copy camera here, and we have some carriage wheels from something else, so we'll put it together. And the paper itself is that white roll at the bottom, and at the top was another roll. And when the doors were closed, you'd pull down the roll, and that was the viewing camera and the viewing back, and you pull down that, expose it, and then it would all pull out the bottom. So it was a very tactile experience.
And one have to bear in mind the size of the actual image, that comes out of it. I just transferred it into centimeter because I'm really not good in inches, and it's like one image is like 50 to 60 centimeters of this Polaroid camera.
Right,
so,
right.
Which is,
it was unique. Really unique.
Quite cool, yeah. And then in terms of, chronology, you kind of from the construct.
Well, these are some of the 20 by 24s or the 50 centimeter one that I made. This was the first one I ever made.
Okay, and here you have also the mirrors reflecting light sources that are outside the picture, outside the image, which I find very interesting because this becomes a pivotal and important idea with regards to the architectural sites.
Exactly.
Later.
Well, the architectural sites became a studio exercise in real life and real scale. So, for instance, here, the orange and black tipped triangle is actually a mirror that's facing away from the camera, and I have on the side, I've built a stretched piece of fabric to reflect the color. So it's better than painting. If I don't like the shape, I just move it in a way and I have another shape. Or if I don't like the color, I just change the color. So it's a very flexible situation, but it's also disorienting because you don't know how deep that space is. And it adds to the dimension and the dimensionality of the piece. There's on the floor, you see this sort of moire pattern. Now that's a piece of window screening that I used in that very first slide that you saw of the cyanotype. So I've used these same kind of, you say, the toolbox of the architect, it's true, but mine, it doesn't expand a lot. It sort of stays within structural and practical materials and paper and this window screening, which we use to keep the bugs out, but becomes very beautiful.
In terms of the visual effects it would create.
Right,
there we come back to Ettore Sozzo somehow. No?
Exactly.
Not the substance, function, but the visual effect, what is of interest.
Exactly,
so,
exactly, yeah.
And then from the controlled space of the studio, you actually went outside in public space.
Right, into, because I was so interested in architecture and so much was going on in New York in the 80s in terms of building and postmodernism, actually Vanity Fair magazine asked a friend of mine to do an article on postmodern architecture and in particular into the entryways of the buildings. And he, in turn, got me involved to make photographs. So basically what I did was enlarged my studio ideas and materials to do the same thing in a real space. Like those are two big mirrors that are reflecting a point of view that's behind the camera. So my idea, which is similar to the studio, is that I wanted the audience to be in the middle of this experience. I wanted information from around to penetrate into the space and exchange positions and actually confuse the real space.
And that is then so much in line with postmodern thought in terms of postmodern architecture, which I feel kind of changed the relationship between body and built space dramatically. You know, all these ideas of, architecture being a home to the body didn't matter anymore. The idea of architecture being a third skin or have social meaning weren't relevant anymore. The interest shifted more to the dramatic dimension of architecture, to the uncanny of whatever houses, bodies, spaces. So, and somehow what architecture did at that time was kind of introducing a phantasmatic space of fiction, so to say.
So to speak,
and this is something I would argue that your work intensified, but on the other hand, it's, I think, also a dismantling of the architecture.
It is.
I mentioned in this little conversation we had before that I was quite intrigued by the idea of the collage of that there are different fragments, image fragments that kind of constitute one picture.
Right.
And I was quite enthusiastic about my idea that the collage in its, history, early 20th century, was always a method to, fragment, to cut in pieces what was there, also probably as a form of resistance against authority. So I can see that there is a celebration of architecture of postmodernism, but also a dismantling and a critique maybe. And I would be interested, how did the architects react on that?
Well, different architects reacted differently, obviously. Frank Gehry was like, oh, you're making art with my art? And yet, Isozaki, who designed the Mocha building in Los Angeles, I saw him in Tokyo, and he was like, oh, that's wonderful, come and have some tea, So you had that wide range of response. But back to a little thought I had as we talked earlier and came to me now was that one of the things I think that I was sort of on the side doing, but not overtly, was putting a little jab in masculinity, because all of these buildings were built by men, and in such, and they represented power. I mean, if you walk into one of these buildings, you're overwhelmed by the kind of architecture that you meet. And so I'm making a fantasy, I'm coloring it, it's a carnival, and they're like, my building? There's a slide here of the High Museum, and this one. This is Richard Myers, and if you know architecture, that building is totally white, and everything he does is totally white. So I had fun. I gave him some Bauhaus colors to work with, right? And the big sliver, the triangle, is a mirror, again, and the statue of Lydia, I think Lydia is the name of the woman, it's an old statue that actually is housed at the High Museum. It happened to be in that room, in that location, so I included her, and it gave it that human touch, too, that you were kind of mentioning. The body suddenly is inserted. And the last thing I want to mention is that when I still exhibit these pieces, the young artists of today look at that and they think it's done digitally. And I said, look at the date, 1986. So, it achieved a lot of little jabs in a lot of people's sides, right?
Yes. Actually,
there was some explanation to these too that I included, like this is the setup of the picture that you saw. This is the back off to see all the lights around it and the kind of atmosphere. And I did use movie lights. They were actually 5K, 10K, really big, hot lights.
And these colored gels.
And then, well,
Gel?
then I put colored gel over them.
Yeah.
Like theatrical gels, right. But there are a lot of planning. If you go to the next slide, this is kind of the layout of that I had on display for the show at the ICA, which showed the process. So in the upper left corner would have been a trip that I would make there and just examine the whole building, take lots of 4x5 with my big camera, 4x5 pictures, and then I would go home and I would kind of play around with the, select the few directions that I thought was interesting and lay out elements like a collage on top of it. And then in order to make these things that, it's at night, it's like all night long. And I have a crew of 10 people, maybe more, maybe less, but in that range. And so everything has to be planned. And so you see the numbers, those are numbers to color gels that have to be ordered in advance in order to make sure we have the right colors selected. And then the drawing is what I did drawings for each one just to get myself, an idea of what I thought it should look like in the coloration and stuff. So this is just a little, procedure.
Just briefly coming back to what you said earlier in terms of male architecture, I kind of introduced, I don't know, I didn't introduce it, but I think in terms of working in this, that deconstructive, celebratory, colorful way, but working with these architecture icons, I felt that this is kind of embodying a feminist methodology. I know that you're not like to be called whatever. Well, feminist probably yes, but you don't want to be categorized as a whatever female artist.
I really wasn't an activist, I mean, I did things in my own subtle way, and persisted in my own subtle way.
And one thing, what I also wanted to mention is in terms of how Arata Isozaki reacted, because I went to LA as well a couple of years ago, and I was quite inspired by the museum he created there. And I know that he was quite aware of, his decline at some moment, because he did these silk prints of of buildings he did build in ruins. So he was anticipating his, iconic architecture as being in ruins. And I spotted these silk prints in a catalog of yours, and I later exhibited them in Kaiten because I loved so much the idea that an architect imagines the future of his babies, whatever, his great conceptions in terms of being in a ruined state.
Right. I think that those images of his were in a portfolio that I participated in too. There were like 6 architects and 6 artists, and it was all about architecture and such. But yes, that's an interesting thing that somebody would think that way, and he wasn't afraid of thinking that way.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And going further, we talked about the body involvement, the involvement of the body in those images. Actually, up to that point, it was more a perceptual involvement in the body, but of the body. But then that changed, and that brings us probably to the next work. Or we have more architectural sites.
Yeah, this is
behind the scenes.
This is Los Angeles at the LA County Museum. It's a pavilion for Japanese art, and
but this is not Isozaki. He did the mocha.
No, this is. Oh gosh, I can't think now.
Who did the Lakma?
Sasaki did mocha, and this was Bruce Goff. That's who it was. So he wasn't a contemporary, right? So this is Frank Gehry.
Nice.
And that's Frank Gehry. And that's
this
Mocha.
is
Yeah.
Izukzaki, yes.
Yeah, that's the one. And this is the Whitney.
Right. So beautiful.
This is the ICA show in Philadelphia. That was the first survey that really addressed my work in several bodies and in disciplines. And they had this 60-foot or 30-foot high corner. And I had just started making videos, but nothing this scale or whatever. But I did decide I needed to occupy that corner, but I wanted to also involve the architecture. And so I used that corner, the actual corner itself, as the subject of this video. So you could see, I think if you go back, you can probably replay it. Now, there it goes again. So really, I'm making the corner revolve, and a sculptural stack of cubes revolving. And those forms became important in what you were interested in, the scenario.
Exactly.
So here's the scale. This is another video. These are like excerpts, the little still clips, because the video itself is too long. But it also used the architecture. So it's really a changing light. I think there is a clip with it next. The light is making the shadow. The light is an important. I always say that I like the shadow is the most important part. It's the light that makes the shadow, but you can't have one without the other. Mm-hmm. You know, you always have to have the shadow, and I am using the shadow and how it reacts on a different surface. So this is like an accordion-shaped wall, but it's not. It's really a model I managed to do that with.
And I actually wanted also to talk about this work, scenario.
And this one was also site-specific for the Graham Foundation, which also took this survey. There's another catalog for that. And this, then I sort of stepped out. I used the shadow. It's an obvious thing. And I built a partial corner. I built the corner and I built partial structure, and I photographed the smaller structure and superimposed it on top. So what you're looking at is some real blocks and some illusionary box of film. So it's this question of what's real and what's not real. How do you perceive it? And it changes, so your perspective and your realization of that space changes.
So there comes the bodily involvement into the work, because it's an installation that you can, surround. And I remember this quote by you that you said, it's like going to a dance performance where you not only, that you not only, engage with visually, but also through your body.
Physically, yeah. It really, and this sort of invites the audience to participate in that way. And there was also a theme to the color, because I made it sort of do a morning to afternoon to evening to nighttime sequence of colors, and that alone changes the whole atmosphere of what's there. I think is the next one from the Aspen Art Museum. Yes. So there you can see the corner that was built. It's a similar corner. It's a stage that was built, really. And these elements in there, some were standing, like I said, and some were just projections. But that was what I was interested in, is this merging. But I also like the theatricality of presenting this kind of movie set-like, backed. How do I say it? It's like it's like the backdrop for a movie set, and so there's like no pretense as to what it is. You can see that it's not real and that it's changed because there's a structure to hold it up. But somehow when you get around it into the front, you kind of believe in it, So, yeah, I like that.
We talked a little bit about, you came to visit Gelsenkirchen, and we went through the Kinetic collection, which is quite huge there.
Right, yeah.
And we talked about some things, some ideas you might share also with this movement, which was much earlier, of course. And I think the idea of the extension of the work in the physical space and the involvement of light to make movement visible is something that probably the kinetic artists established as an important thing very early on. And also what they did, and which is kind of implicit also in your work, is that they kind of replaced a passive consumer of art into a more active agent, so to say, who kind of moves around the work, who actually, in that case of kinetic art, very often can touch the work in order to make it. One of the artists in the collection said, Rolf Glasmeier, he said, well, I'm just designing programs, the audience does the art. Right. So this is something, I think this reverberates also through your practice. And what I like a lot in terms of giving a bigger picture of probably a roughly shared historical moment is this idea of post-war mobility, hybridity, of post-war, thinking, of post-war living, that kind of, needed an art which is kind of vivid as well, and living and moving.
Well, it's really interesting to look back at a time period and a discipline that doesn't get a lot of exposure, and see how rich it was, or it is, in ideas that I've incorporated, but from a totally different point of view. I mean, I get more ideas and motivation from painting or from sculpture, or now, having seen this, it's like motivates me to think more in terms of movement. But, in the past, I wanted movement. That's why I started making videos. Mm-hmm. I needed that element that the Bauhaus used. I mean, they used movement and dance and form. There were some incredible forms, even Oscar Schlemmer and all those dance things that he did. So that's how I got into the video thing. And the illusion of space and shadow and form is something that your kinetic people already were using in a much more tactile way. It was more of an object. Mine's more of an illusion mixed with an object. Nice, yes. But that's what makes artists grow, when they see past history or have some experience outside of their own, ideas.
I would actually like to move forward to the works. Actually, I would skip those for a moment.
Where are we going?
To the. Sorry, no, it's. Sorry for that. I think to these
Okay, that was the piece I did for K10, then your show, and it was the first one that I did where I actually included sculptural elements and projection on top of it, so that you were not just looking at a flat wall with an illusion. You also had an experience of something coming forward that was, physically there. And so, from the side, it entered into the space in a way that it hadn't. But those forms intermingle. because some of the forms or the material is the same in the video. The forms aren't necessarily the same, but they merge.
Right, and I felt, it created a feeling almost of a dazzling moment and a feeling of vertigo. What is more real? Is it the object or the film projection?
Exactly.
And I kind of, amongst the what you said before in terms of how contemporary artists, react on your works, I feel that also these works, I go back and then it starts moving again, I think, that it's kind of a predecessor of also our image-saturated contemporary world, where, all our social, emotional bondings are played out in imagery, in digital imagery, where the image is such an important, factor to communicate. And, and then you have, in that work, you have already this moment where the projection of the video of these cubes is probably on the same level of reality, so to say, than the elusive ephemeral cubes that are installed there.
Well, this kind of makes me think about my attitude or feeling about abstraction, because, I think it has, it's an abstraction, and yet you don't really know. I mean, there's no identity. It's just a spatial kind of experience, a perceptual experience. And I like the fact that abstraction really opens up one's minds to what you just said, is like, which part of this is real? You have to sort it out. You have to figure it out for yourself, and then you never get the answer anyway. So that's good, that gives us our little gray matter some exercise that we need these days, So, so that's kind of what I was aiming. Well, one of the aspects of what I was aiming for in the videos. That
this is another piece.
Another view of that. That's the one that was in Aspen.
Yeah.
So again, each one was a little different in the sculptural aspect of it. What's the next one? This one was done at Cottle Wilborn Gallery for the first time, and it again is homage to the Bauhaus colors, and it's the same blocks. I mean, I kind of like use things over and over again, but hopefully in different ways. And this one's called Sideways Corner, I think, or Corner anyway. It's something to do with the corner, because I love corners. And in fact, all those plexi boxes, sculptures that were in the last two videos are just corners. They're not complete cubes. And this is... do we have a revolving one of this? I don't think so. But I found corners in exhibition places that I could use the same video. So, it's like not site-specific. It's kind of adjust to reality or to what's available. And those boxes just turn and change colors and size and forms. It's kind of like that cubics thing that you do, and you turn the boxes and it becomes another form. This was outside presentation in Dallas at Symphony Center, and in fact there was an orchestra, a little quartet, not an orchestra, that played in addition to this revolving form. So I love mixing media like that, even if I'm not the one that is playing. It's still it's a new merging and a new idea to put those things together with the same video sometimes.
And I think we have skipped now the black and white constructs, but I think we should move on to some architectural works. I mean, works that were site-specific to architecture.
Okay,
in terms of
okay,
so
right.
this is Crown Hall,
the Crown Hall
in Chicago. And I know that you grew up not far away from this place.
This was, this of course is Mies van der Rohe, and Crown Hall is his masterpiece of open structure. And it is not far from where I live. It's at IIT, which is Institute of Technology. And it's that space is a studio space for students during the year. Now, I was given permission to work in there as a studio myself for, I think, about 6 weeks. And what I did was I used all the tables that the students would use for their studies and created forms, created sculptures, but I also changed them on a daily basis. There was never a permanent state. Mm-hmm. It was, again, going in and responding to the light, to, I'd steal some parts from one and put it in another. So this whole idea of never being still and finished.
And honoring Mies van der Rohe's architecture?
Well, the light in this space is incredible, and those windows have a very beautiful frosted quality. Go on further and look at the floor. It's so polished it becomes a mirror. So it had all the elements that I use in a studio project, but they were on a different scale for a different purpose. And these, I did make photographs, so go to the next one.
Yeah.
Now that's a photograph, not of one of the sculptures, but more about the window and the reflections in the window and the color pieces of plexi that I did use in the sculpture. So it was a kind of a giant moving installation.
So, and again, it's the quality of the surfaces that you're interested in
the material. I'm really into materials and architectural materials and structures. By the way, that the rigidness of the Mies configurations is what I was again taking apart and deconstructing.
Yeah. Can I just go back to that? Because just to add a thought I had, because I feel it's an honoring of what is there in terms of, tables, the great architecture by Mies, but then if all those, metal poles and tables are stuck dramatical upon each other, they seem to kind of almost bursting asunder. Can you say that? So there is a moment of chaos also that is kind of like an antipode. Do you say that? Like something that is kind of undermining the modernist.
That's the whole idea. Right. To get there and let's mix this one up. Let's tell Mies that maybe he could have done this instead of that. But not as a criticism at all. You're right. It's more of an honor, and you're right. It gives a different energy to the space. Yeah. I think there's another one or two. That's also reflection from the outside on those windows. And
we shouldn't miss the aspen one.
It's in there. Keep going. Yeah. Okay. These are some of the photographs that were made at the Crown Hall, and it led into this kind of an installation of the tables. Those are the tables again, with the same color plexi, but with a spotlight, so it makes it, again, a photogram, because the light projects the shape of the forms onto the wall. So you're really talking about...
Is the image moving?
What?
The image
it's
a still image.
It doesn't move. No. What's the next one? Oh, and that basically does the same thing, but this is at Paramount Studios that Frieze did use their lot for their art fair. And this piece was done for a marathon interview session by Hans Ulrich Obrist, who is a very well-known curator. And so this served as the backdrop. But when I was invited to show it at the Paramount Studios, this is the innards of what those sets look like. And so it's, and what I'm using are forms that are based on grids, on beams, on architectural elements. So it kind of came home to where the inside of a structure. And so it seemed like a perfect kind of setting for it.
And that this was a space where the interview took place?
No, it actually took place in Chicago
okay.
in a different location, but I was invited to show the piece because they did a big publication and everything with it, and so it was known, and somebody had realized how good it would look in that, or how it related to the structure that was exposed, the building structure that was architecturally the structure for the outside of the building. So it's kind of like taking the wraps off of things.
I don't know. I would like to, because time is moving on.
Is it moving?
Yes. As the light is moving.
And so is this moving.
And
now,
so is this. I definitely wanted to have you guys a look at this work.
This was at the, it is very site-specific. The Aspen Museum is covered with Shigeru Ban's grid of wooden blocks. You see the shadow is this surrounding of the building, and the sunlight comes through, and all I did was put these grids on the wall, and this is what happens during the day. So the sun comes up and goes down, and so it became its own animation, it became its own video, but never to be seen again in that particular place. So
so the building somehow became the picture plane. So it's really a site-specific installation that kind of combines all your kind of ideas and working methods and applies that to a in situ building, so to say, and really working with what is there in terms of the grid structure that you don't need it to kind of. I mean, you brought definitely these are mirrors as well.
They're plexiglass mirrors, and they were placed not directly on the wall, but at different distances from the wall. So it had sort of a curved, if you look from the side, it had sort of a curve which added to the way the light and the shadow was projected. But I felt like, I really feel like this was the epitome of merging my interest in architecture to this is what really surrounds the building. And it kind of, it's really a good collaboration without being a collaboration. And I like that. And then these were made for this alcove. I think there's another picture at the Aspen Museum. No, I guess not.
These are the progressions.
Or it went the other way, I don't know.
But in terms of, also what comes next, you will have similar works that come in the future. I think you talked about the UK and
right. Well, it's another challenge to have a commentary on a very important piece of architecture and have a sort of even exchange of thoughts and ideas and feelings, because I've been invited to do an exhibition in the south of the UK, right on the Channel. There's a place called Bexit-on-Sea, and it houses the Delaware, some people call it, pavilion built in 1935 by Sergei Mendelssohn and Chimaev. Maybe his name is Sergei, but anyway, it was Chimaev and Mendelssohn, and they built this when they were partners in 1935, and it's just this glorious example of Art Deco, and also very important because it was meant as a community center, a place for, it didn't house a gallery until later, but it has a 60-foot window that faces out towards the sea, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with that, because that's a lot of light coming in all at once into this space. And it doesn't have this, which is already built in. So I might use that concept of reflection and bouncing back the shadows somehow, to show it's the connection to the sea. I have to find some way to do that.
So
this is
we
all
should
brand
all
new.
go there, because that's where we can see your work next, I suppose.
That's the next place. Yeah.